You know, life of brutal dictator isn't always sunshine and lollipopski. Sometimes it's lonely job. But when I'm feeling cranky and a little blue, I sit around and consider the many things which make me happy.
Creating terror with government purges.
Welcome to Bite-Sized Bios. This is meant to be a mini-sode that will accompany HDTH. Every week, I will pick a person from history and dive into their lives. All right, welcome back to another episode of Bite-Sized Bios. I am your host, Richard Dix. This is episode number 35, I do believe. This is, of course, the mini-sode accompaniment to How Did That Happen? So we always have to get into what happened on the previous episode of HDTH. And I do want to say, the first thing I want to get out, and I knew the moment I made the mistake, I was like, this is what the mini episode is for. I'm just going to address it then. I said 10,000 Cuban refugees or Cuban exiles that were during the Bay of Pigs. It was like 1,200. I mean, maybe it was like 1,400 people. I don't know why. I mean, I had the notes in front of me, and I still said that, and I put it in a little in the kind of the what's the title card or whatever the information for the podcast episode, just saying, like, don't at me, guys. I know, I felt so, but I was already, like, when I caught it, I was already so close to being done with the pod, like editing it, that I was just like, well, you know what, this is just gonna have to happen. They're just gonna have to think that 10,000 Cuban dudes stormed the Bay of Pigs in 1960. Was it 1960, I think. I don't have my notes with me. But yes, I wanted to get that off my chest. It has been on there sitting like a bull for the last 7 days or so. Now you guys know that I know that you know that I knew that it was not 10,000. But good episode. Learned a lot about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like I said, the main thing that I learned was that they were not the same thing. I literally thought that was true probably up until about a week ago. And they are connected. They are very much connected, but they are not the same thing. It is, you learn how close we came to just being blown to smithereens. One interesting thing that I did note, or that I noticed that I didn't really think about before, was just like they talked about the sheer size of these bombs and how they were just massive and like 10 times, if not 100 times, the scale of what was initially dropped, in 1945. And it's like I said, it makes so much sense. It's like saying, they had TVs in 1945. We have TVs now. Yeah, they're not even close to being the same thing. You know what I mean? But they are. But there's been so much evolution that, of course, what we have now is a more superior product. So why wouldn't the atomic bombs that we have also be, have evolved in that same way? Because they even said, I think, what was it? I think Russia, was it Russia that dropped a bomb in the 50s? I want to say in the ocean, but it was so strong that people that like a boat full of Japanese fishermen that were way away, they got radioactive, basically charged, and got sick from that, because it was so much further than what they expected the bomb, the what they call the fallout or whatever, for it to go, because they just weren't sure how strong it was going to be. But yeah, so learned a lot. Learned that, from the documentaries that I watched, I'm not sure how much of it actually, because I got into the episode, because it's been a while since recorded it, but how JFK was so, worried about handling this situation, and he was getting a little bit of bad intel, and people were telling him to blow up Russia, or not, but blow up Cuba, let's rush Cuba. They don't know what they're doing, and thankfully he didn't make those decisions, because we could have had World War III, because he didn't realize how committed Russia was to having that area as a nuclear warhead, or excuse me, as a nuclear war base for them. They had put 40,000 Soviet troops, embedded in Russia. They were really prepared for war, and I don't think America knew that. But another thing that it was, I think the last thing that I'll mention that I think was just something interesting to take away from that episode was that it was the Russians really were doing what they were doing in retaliation to what was already being done to them. I know we always want to have this Americentric view of things, and everything's got to be from the American perspective, but in my opinion, we already had nukes pointed at them really close to their country, and so it would only seem fair that they could, or not, let's not get into fair, but it would seem plausible and reasonable that they would do the same thing. And I think once you realize that, which I didn't know, like I said, we had the missiles in Turkey, I believe it was. And once you realize that, it's like, oh, they're just reacting. They're just humans that are reacting to what's being done to them. Doesn't make it right or wrong, but it does add color to the picture. It adds perspective. It gives you a different way of viewing things. But yeah, I think that's about it. Before we get really started, there may have been some audio issues in the last episode. I'm not sure, guys. I don't know. I'm still getting this kind of down with a new setup and a new, I guess a new studio, you could say, but it's a totally new setup. I'm actually looking to get some new equipment here pretty soon, maybe by the next episode. Who knows? But we'll see. Let's see. Before I start to ramble here, there's not much else to say. As always, HTT Happen for everything. You guys already know, HTTHappen.com. At HTT Happen for all the socials. Yeah, give us 5 stars if you loved it, 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. Yeah, so as we're going to do, without further ado, here is the episode.
Finally, into the palace courtyard sweeps the long black car bearing one of the greatest military leaders of all time, Marshal of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin.
All right, so today we are talking about Stalin. We are talking about Joseph Stalin, and he is a very interesting figure and definitely a very important figure in the 40s to 70s timeline we're kind of on right now. He was a leader of Russia in the 40s and 50s, and actually even the 30s. He took over for Lenin. Lenin kind of, as we know, kind of started the USSR, and then Stalin comes in behind him and ends up kind of just pushing it forward and, becoming, how do you say? Every Russian leader kind of puts his own spin on Russia, we see. But definitely Stalin was there through World War II. Of course, was the first person to see Hitler's body and then hide Hitler's body from the Western world, which then basically started the Cold War. He would die, I think, in the 50s. We're going to get there. But yeah, so we're talking about Stalin today. This is, of course, Bite-Sized Bios. Hope you guys like it. Stalin was born in Georgia, which is actually not a part of Russia, in the town of Gori, which was still, it's part of Russia, part of the Russian Empire, but not actually like Russia. Like, I was surprised to hear that the man who would lead Russia was not actually born in Russia. He was born on December the 18th, 1878. He was baptized December 29th. His whole name was Lozib Bessariones de Jugashvili. Yep, which is Joseph Stalin. We're going to go with that. But his nickname was So-So, because they didn't want to say it either. Which is, that was a take on his Loseb name. Somehow they got Soseb. But his parents were named Bessarion, Jugash, there's a name, Jugashvili, and Ekaterin Galadze. Stalin was the only child of his family to survive past infancy, because this was back in the 19th century. Babies weren't just surviving a lot back then. So his father was a cobbler, was of course like a shoemaker, who was employed in a workshop that was owned by another dude, who was initially, I guess the dude was making money, but then he ended up not making that much money, and the family found themselves living in poverty. He was also a drunk. He would beat his wife and his son. That would make his wife and son, his wife would take their son and leave in 1883, and they began a life of wandering, moving through 9 different rented rooms over the next 10 years, so almost a different place every year. I've lived that life before. It's no fun. In 1886, they moved into the house of a family friend, Father Christopher Chark-Vianney. That's a pretty cool name, Chark-Vianney. Ekaterin, is that Ekaterin? It's basically just like the Russian version of Catherine, I guess. But she worked as a house cleaner and launderer and was determined to send her son to school. Stalin ended up going to school in 1888. He enrolled at the Orthodox Gori Church School. He got in a bunch of fights there. He was also really smart, though. Displayed talent in painting, drama, all this stuff, poetry. He was a choir boy. He had several health problems. He even got smallpox in 1884, which left him with facial scars. In 1894, he would enroll in seminary. This is kind of what I was talking about before. I think I mentioned on the last episode, we talk about trying to really get to the bottom of these very complex men in history who have had have done a lot and had to deal with a lot, be it however way you view it, whatever your perspective is. He started out wanting to be a priest. Like it's like how what's his face is the Ukrainian guy. He's used to be an actor. It's like you never know what you're gonna be until you're it. Until you're in it, until you're at war and you're leading a country. He initially in 1894, this dude was in seminary school. He joined 600 other trainee priests, and he also got really good grades. He kept writing poetry. I mean, imagine that. I think because I watched some documentaries and I really couldn't come to like the real bottom, the foundation of why he's so hated, I guess is the word maybe to use. And I'm not saying he's a good guy, but I don't know. Like no one had the real answer. They always said so many people died, and I think because of poverty and probably the way he instituted his version of communism and getting into certain wars he probably shouldn't have gotten in. Yes, that leads people to die. But does that inherently make him an evil person? I don't know. Like Hitler, that dude, evil. You know what I mean? But Stalin, and I'm sure I'm probably wrong about this. I'm sure there's plenty of evidence to the contrary of just why he is just a mess of a person who should not be revered in any shape or fashion. But I'm just on the outside. For me, he wrote poetry. He was a priest. Or he wanted to be a priest. He continued to go by Soso, excuse me, he's not Chief Keef, but and then he would write poetry under the pseudonym Sosello, and evidently people they were pretty good, people liked them. They were considered quote unquote minor Georgian classics. They were included in various anthologies of Georgian poetry over the coming years. So there are actually Stalin poems out there written under the pseudonym Sosello. If you're looking for it, you can find poetry written by the great Russian leader of the 20th century. And as he grew older, he lost interest in being a priest. His grades dropped. He was repeatedly confined to a cell for his rebellious behavior, which is that's interesting way to handle bad grades. But the seminary's journal noted that he declared himself an atheist, which is the exact opposite, the antithesis of why you're there. He stalked out of prayers and refused to doff his hat to the monks. You better doff your hat, man. We are hat doffers in this house. Stalin joined a forbidden book club at the school. It's kind of sounding Harry Pottery now. He was particularly influenced by Nikolai Chernyshevsky's 1863 pro-revolutionary novel What Is to Be Done? ? Another influential text was Alexander Kazbeg's The Patricide. Stalin adopted the nickname Koba from the book's protagonist. So he was just, rebellious little guy in seminary school. Did a lot of reading, a lot of writing poetry, not a lot of loving the Lord. Just doing the exact opposite. So he would, he left the seminary in 1899. Never came back. So he never became a priest, right? He had priest ideas. He had priest, motives for a little bit, and then he gave up. He ended up getting involved in the Russian Revolution. We covered a little bit in Russia Part 1. I say Part 1 because, yes, Russia Part 2 is coming. January 1905, government troops massacred protesters in St. Petersburg. Unrest soon spread across the Russian Empire in what came to be known as the Russian Revolution of 1905. Georgia was affected. Of course, Georgia is where Stalin's from. Stalin formed a Bolshevik battle squad, which he used to try to keep Baku's warring ethnic factions apart. He also used the unrest as a cover for stealing printing equipment. Oh, well. Amid the growing violence throughout Georgia, he formed further battle squads, making battle squads all over the place. With the Mensheviks, also did that as well. So Stalin's his squads, those battle squads he's making, they would disarm local police and troops that would raid government arsenals and then raise funds through protection rackets and on large local businesses and mines. They launched attacks on the government's Cossack troops and pro-Tsarist Black Hundreds, coordinating some of their operations with the Menshevik militia as well. So they had a large part in the Russian Revolution. And actually, in November of 1905, he was elected as, what do they call him? As a delegate to the Bolshevik conference by the Georgian Bolsheviks, and he was sent to St. Petersburg, which is actually where he would meet Lenin for the first time. Although Stalin held a lot of respect for Lenin, he was vocal in his disagreement with Lenin that the Bolsheviks should field candidates for the forthcoming election to State Duma. Stalin saw the parliamentary process as a waste of time completely. So that was the first time meeting that would actually be very important because, like I said, he would end up, when all this would kind of kick off, the USSR would kick off, Lenin would actually end up handing power over to Stalin. But like I said, initially they disagreed. For a while, Stalin ended up marrying this woman named Kato Svanadiz in an Orthodox church ceremony in 1906. This is like I said, a year after he was named a delegate to the Bolshevik conference after the Russian Revolution. That next year, she bore them a son, Yakov. It's fun to say, Yakov. He would continue to kind of do some fighting throughout the mid-1900s and the 10s. He would end up being exiled. Stalin was arrested in 1908 and interned in Bailov prison in Baku, and there he led the imprisoned Bolsheviks, organized discussion groups in order the killing of suspected informants. He was still getting down. You cannot stop that man from forming a battle squad. You put him in prison, he forms prison battle squads. He was eventually sentenced to 2 years exile in the village of Soviet-Chekodsk, Volodya province. He got there in 1909. He escaped and made it to Kotlas. He was disguised as a woman and got back to St. Petersburg. So he was not there. You can't hold him down. You know, if I can't make a battle squad, I'm definitely escaping. I'm not just going to hang out here solo dolo. He was arrested again once he got back to St. Petersburg. They sent him back to Soviet-Chekodsk, that were something like that. He ended up having affairs with women while he was there, so not so much exile happening all the time. He basically stayed exiled for throughout the 1910s, almost up until World War I, really. Let's see. So while he was in exile, Russia entered World War I, like I said. And in October 1916, Stalin and the other exiled Bolsheviks were conscripted into the Russian army. But once he got in, he was actually ruled unfit for military service because of his crippled arm. I think he had some sort of child injury to his arm that I guess they were like, even we don't want you. Even the Red Army, which was not the Red Army yet, even the Russian army does not want you. So because of that, he was required to serve 4 more months in his exile, and then he successfully requested that he serve it in nearby Achinsk. So this all happens right around the actual, it is the Russian Revolution. What's the other one called? Let's go back a little bit here. Are they both Russian revolutions? Let's see. Yeah, pretty much. That's why when I was doing the actual the Russia episode, it was somewhat confusing because I was like, how many revolutions these people got? How many revolutions we doing? They're like, a lot, bro, a lot. But yeah, so he ended up. He was around when the Russian Revolution happened, the main one in 1917 when they established a provincial government. Let's see, get back to that a little bit. The czars were overthrown. Tsar Nicholas went bye-bye. The Russian Empire became a de facto republic headed by the provincial government that was dominated by the liberals. Let's see, I'm trying to get... Because, we with people like this, we could talk about everything he ever did. And that would just be boring. This is bite-sized bios, so we've covered the foundation of who this man is. We know that he was instrumental in World War II, as well as leading USSR through the 40s and 50s. Let's jump to some other stuff that might be a little more important before we get out of here about him. Specifically, how did this man die? In his later years, Stalin was in poor health. He took increasingly long holidays. In 1950, and again in 1951, he spent almost 5 months on holiday at his Abkhazian dacha. Yep, he was there. Nevertheless, he mistrusted his doctors, and in January 1952, he had one imprisoned after they suggested he should retire to improve his health. So, this guy's not looking for any real diagnosis. How am I doing, Doc? Are you doing great? You're doing great, buddy. I like my freedom. In September 1952, several Kremlin doctors were arrested for allegedly plotting to kill senior politicians in what came to be known as the Doctors' Plot. The majority of the accused were Jewish. Not sure why that was important. He instructed the arrested doctors to be tortured to ensure a confession. Yeah, there's not much more about that. I thought we were getting to his death here. We just keep talking. There we go. Let's see where we at. We're in 1952. 1952. He also eliminated the Politburo and replaced it with a larger version, which he called the Presidium. It's a fun word to say. You know what? It's not. I must not have fully in my notes. We're gonna look it up. We're gonna take a live look in to Stalin's death, y'all. Give me 1 second. How did he die? How did he die? We're gonna find out. Was it diarrhea? I don't think so, but maybe. Alright, let's go. Let's see. Death of Stalin. The newest ride coming to Universal Studios. They do not make it easy to find. Where is it? Death toll? No. Alright, we're just gonna Google. How did Stalin die? Oh, cerebral hemorrhage. All right. It's not sexy, but leave it to Google. Well, the USSR claimed it was a hemorrhagic stroke. But of course, because it's Russia, nobody really knows. They're saying it could have been poisoning now that I'm reading this. I'm in a forum now. How did I get on Reddit? I don't know. But so yeah, March 5th, 1953, our man J. Stahl checked out due to a cerebral hemorrhaging, according to the good old USSR. Now, what I will use to play myself out for this bite-sized bios will be a little bit of Russian propaganda footage. Why not?
Сталин принял начальника британского имперского генерального штаба фельдмаршала Монтгомери.
All right, and so that was Joseph Stalin in a nutshell. He's still in that nutshell. We've got to get him out. But we learned a lot. I hope we learned a lot. I learned the biggest thing for me, this man wanted to be a priest, and he used to write poetry, and some of his poetry is still out there under the pseudonym Socello. So your homework for this week, go find some of that Stalin poetry and read it back to me. Send me voice notes or put it on the Twitter page. Something, I don't know. Just find it. It must be found. But yeah, I mean, that's when we talk about these guys. You look at him as just they're multifaceted individuals. They contain multitudes. There are levels to this when we come to talking about these dictators or any of these great men. Because you think about it, and I was even looking. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I've mentioned it before, but these are just people. They're just men. They're just people who were put in a position and had to react. He didn't wake up, I don't think, thinking one day I'm going to run Russia. I really don't think that. He went through different things. He wanted to be a priest, and then he ended up, getting exiled and getting involved with Lenin. I mean, these things kind of just snowball. It's the universe. It's not, like it was a foregone conclusion, I think is one thing you could kind of take away from this man's life. The same thing with Harry S. Truman, what we're seeing here. I mean, he was also a person who, up until his early 40s, was fairly unremarkable. He hadn't done much. His wife's family thought he was a failure. He would end up being the only man ever in history to push the button to drop the atomic bomb. I mean, who can tell what's coming? I mean, no one knows. But so he's just another one that we've covered in this series here. I'm not sure who was next. We have a lot of people to kind of try to get through when you really start breaking down who were the influential figures from 1940 to 1970. But yeah, as always, if you like what you heard here, give us 5 stars wherever you find this. 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. We do appreciate it. Helps the pod grow. At HTT Happen for all of the socials. HTTHappen.com is where the home base is at. I don't think there's much else to say to you guys before we get out of here. As always, I appreciate the ones that come back week to week, press and play. I really do. We'll see you next week with the next How Did That Happen. But as always, before we get out of here, I think I will play a little bit more. This is actually going to be Churchill in Moscow. So a little bit of Churchill in Moscow. But thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
We present the Soviet newsreel story of the Prime Minister's 4-day visit to Moscow. On the afternoon of the day of his arrival at an airport of the Russian capital, Soviet, British, and American representatives, headed by M. Molotov, came forward as the giant Liberator Commando taxied to rest after its long journey from Cairo. At the invitation of M. Stalin, Mr. Churchill had come at the head of an Anglo-American delegation for the war's most vital series of conferences.